Okay, good evening, everybody. It's Wednesday night. I hope everybody had a wonderful Shavuos and got a brand new Torah. So, everybody's excited, I'm sure. Okay, tonight's Wednesday night, so we're learning halacha and Tanya. The halacha that we're in the middle of now is the laws of, we learned about washing for bread. Now the dinim we were learning before Shavuos were the concept of, it was 2 weeks ago, because last week we learned about Shavuos. About making a bracha on the bread, and we said that when you hold the bread, when you make a bracha on the bread, and the definition of bread is again flour and water, but the flour has to be from one of the 5 species, which are really wheat and barley and offshoots. But the 5 grains are wheat, barley, rye, oats, and spelt. If flour is made from one of those 5 types, and you mix it with water, and you bake it, then it is hametzi. If you mix flour and water and you cook it, it's mezainis. But those dinim we're going to learn in more detail later. But now we're learning about the actual concept of bread. And we learned that when a person is about to make a bracha on bread, so number one, you should hold the bread. Normally, we learned when you make a bracha on food, you should hold it in your right hand. By bread, it says, though, the custom is, in halacha, it says you're supposed to hold it with all 10 fingers and make the bracha hametzi. Why is that? Because there's 10 mitzvahs connected to the mitzvah of having bread. All the way starting from, you can't plow with the ox and the donkey, you can't mix grains, you have to leave certain people to certain things to the poor people, you have to separate the tithes. So therefore, as Chazal say, there's 10 words in the bracha of hametzi lechem in haaretz, and so therefore, when we make a bracha on bread, generally speaking, you make hold it in all 10 fingers, and you make the bracha hametzi. Okay, now the custom is also that when you eat bread and you make hametzi, and this doesn't apply only to men, and it doesn't only apply on Shabbos. It says that you're supposed to have salt on the table. Why do you have salt on the table? Because we know our sages tell us the table is likened to the altar. Shulchan domeh lemizbeach. The shulchan that we eat, the table that we eat food at, is likened to the altar in the Bais Din. Now, in the Bais Din, there was a law, a biblical law, al kor karbancha takriv melech. Anytime you brought any sacrifice, whether it's a flower, bird, animal, any flower offering that somebody would bring as a sacrifice, they had to put salt on it. So therefore, because the table is likened to an altar, so we're supposed to have salt on the table. That's if you're eating bread, by the way. Now, also, the din is that so there's different customs. Some people, if you notice, will pour salt on the challah or on the bread. According to Kabbalah, and that's our custom, that we dip the bread into the salt. How many times do we dip the bread into the salt? 3 times. Why do we dip the bread into salt 3 times? So the reason for that is a little Kabbalistic, but very simple Kabbalistic. The word melach, salt, mem lamet ches, is numerically 78. Mem is 40, lamet is 30, ches is 8, so it's 78. Yud Kei Vav Kei, Hashem's name, is 20 equals 26. 3 times 26 equals 78. So 3 times God's name equals the word Melach. So therefore, the custom is according to Kabbalah, and that's our custom, by the way. We dip the bread or the matzah or the challah, whatever we're eating. We make and that, by the way, applies during the week, on Shabbos, Yom Tov, doesn't matter. Every time you eat bread, according to halacha and Kabbalistically, people are not careful in it, but I don't know why. But according to halacha, you have to dip according to Kabbalah, the way we hold, you have to dip the bread into the salt 3 times. Because again, the bread is the essence of the meal and the staple of the meal, and the table is like into Mizbeach and all sacrifices have salt. So that's what we do. Another thing is, so somebody wants to ask the Rebbe, so like on Rosh Hashanah, we have honey. Okay, we also dip the challah into salt on Rosh Hashanah also. But primarily, we dip the challah into honey. So somebody asked the Rebbe, are you supposed to dip also 3 times because you don't have melach? So are we also supposed to dip 3 times the challah into the honey? And the Rebbe said yes. Why? Because just like melach, salt, equals 78, melach is the same letters as the word lechem, which is bread. So bread also equals 78. So even though you're not using salt, you're using honey, but the Rebbe maintained that you should dip the challah into the honey or bread into honey also 3 times for the same reason. Okay, now you're supposed to have, I saw an interesting thing. There are opinions that hold, what happens if you don't have salt? I mean, worst comes to worst, you make a meitzi anyway. But there are opinions in halacha that say then you should use sugar. If you don't have salt, you should use sugar and dip the challah into the sugar 3 times. Why? Because they write, so sugar is a preservative, and the poskim write that if what happens by the sacrifices, if they didn't have salt, they would be able to use sugar. So because of that, the din is, and that's what the poskim say, that if you don't have salt, you can use sugar instead. Another din is as follows, that when you give out challah to people of bread, you're not allowed to throw bread, ever, even if it won't become disgusting. There's a halacha like this. You're never allowed to throw food. But if it's a food that by throwing it won't become disgusting, you're allowed to throw food. For instance, you're allowed to throw an apple, a pear, a tangerine, fruits, or any food that by throwing it won't become disgusting from it. So you're allowed to throw it. Bread, though, you have to be honored, so to speak, you have to have more respect for bread. So the bottom line is, bread you're never allowed to throw. So if somebody says, pass me a piece of bread, and so, people just have a tendency to flip it over, you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to throw bread because it's disrespectful, and you have to put it in front of them. You have to put the bread in front of them, and then they could take it. Now, if you have a whole piece of bread, or a half a piece of bread. Let's have your whole challah, let's say, a whole roll. And you're going to be eating a whole roll and a part of a roll. So you should always make a bracha on the whole one, on the complete one. It's more respectful when you make a bracha to say it on what's called sholim. Okay, now, this din that we said you should make a bracha on the whole before the half, and the half, whatever it is, that only applies if you're planning to eat all of them. What happens if I'm planning to eat the half? That's all I'm planning to eat. I'm not planning to eat the whole roll. So I don't have to make a bracha on the whole roll because it's whole. If I'm eating both, if I'm eating the complete roll and I'm eating the piece of a roll and I'm going to eat both, so then you make a bracha on the complete roll. But otherwise, you don't have to eat the whole roll just to be able to make a bracha on the complete one. They tell a story that the non-Chassidic crowd once wanted to test the Tzemach Tzedek to see if he knew all the laws of brachas, because the laws of brachas are pretty complicated. If you're eating different things, what do you eat first and second and third? What do you make a bracha on? The whole procedure is very complicated. So they gave him a big fruit basket with every possible question in halacha that could be. And they wanted to see what is he going to make a bracha on. And Tzemach Tzedek took a fruit, he made a bracha on it, which was completely contrary to what they maintained as the order of the bracha. And they said to him, hey, you didn't do according to halacha. He said, what are you talking about? I didn't want to eat anything else. This whole law of what comes first in brachas is if I'm planning to eat the different things, I need to know, what do I make a bracha on first and second? But if this is what I'm taking, you don't know what you're talking about. You said, this is what I want. This is what I'm making a bracha on. I don't have to eat something else that I don't want to eat because I want to make a bracha on something else. That doesn't work. Okay. Next is like this. Next in Kitzur, covering the challah on Shabbos is only applying to Shabbos because halachically, I don't want to elaborate on it, but very briefly, when you're eating bread, we're going to learn those dinim later. When you eat bread, so let's say cake and wine. Halachically, first you make a bracha on the cake, and then you make a bracha on the wine. If you eat bread and wine, first you make a bracha on the bread, then you make a bracha on the wine. Because in the pasuk that speaks about the 7 species that Eretz Yisrael was praised with, it goes by the order of the pasuk. The pasuk first says wheat, chita, seira, and then the third one is vines or grapes or berei priagov. So therefore, if somebody during the week is going to be eating cake, like they're going to sit down to a farbrengen, okay, and the farbrengen there's going to be wine and there's going to be cake. What do you make a bracha on first? Halachically, you have to make a bracha on, if you can eat, but if you're going to eat the cake and drink the wine, you don't have to eat the cake. Then you can only make a bracha on the wine. That's fine. But if you're planning to eat cake and wine, halachically, you have to make a bracha first on the cake because that comes from wheat, and then you can make a bracha on the wine. So Shabbos, really, we should make hametzi before the Kiddush. The problem is you're not allowed to eat before Kiddush. You're not allowed to eat before Kiddush. If you're not allowed to eat before Kiddush, then you can't make hametzi on the challah and not listen to Kiddush. So what do? Halacha says you have to make Kiddush first because without Kiddush you can't eat. But not to embarrass the challah that really should go first. So we cover the challah as if it's not here. That's the reason why we cover. But that doesn't apply during the week. During the week, if it's not Shabbos or Yom Tov, there's no reason to cover the challah. You only cover the challah because Shabbos you have to make Kiddush first. Okay, so now let's come to the etiquette of a meal. And there's a lot of etiquette that Torah says, the definition of etiquette of a meal that really has a basis in halacha. So number one, it says in the pasuk, in Shema we say it, in second paragraph of Shema, V'nasati Esav b'satcha levehemtecha. Hashem says, I will give grass in the fields for your animals, v'alchalta v'savata, and you will eat and become satisfied. The fact that the pasuk first says, Hashem says, I am going to give food for your animals, and then you will eat and be full. From there, the Gemara learns out that if you have animals to feed, that means they're your responsibility. They're your responsibility to feed the animals. You have to feed the animals before you eat yourself. Okay? Some people say if you're only eating a snack, then you can eat a snack without feeding your animal. But if you're eating a full meal, the din is you have to feed your animal. Again, these are only animals that you own and are responsible to feed. You don't have to feed the birds outside your house. So the din is you have to feed your animals first. What about when it comes to drinking, not eating? So it's interesting. We learned from Chumash that when Eliezer came to the well to find a shidduch with Rivka for Yitzchak, so Rivka said to him, I will give you to drink and your camels to drink. Over there, the pasuk says, Rivka said, I will give you to drink and then your animals. So from there, the Gemara learns out, when it comes to drinking, people get served before the animals. If it comes to eating, then because the Torah says first, I'll give food for your animals and then you will eat. So we learn out first, if you have an animal, you have to feed it first. Okay, now when a person eats, they shouldn't eat, pardon the expression, like people do at a Kiddush and Shul. And I'm sorry. People shouldn't eat like if they're starving to death and they're fresh foods as if they haven't, it looks like they haven't eaten for years. You're not allowed to eat standing. By the way, it's a din shulchan aruch, not only because you might get fat feet, but you're not allowed to eat standing, even though everybody does. You're not allowed to drink standing. Your table has to be clean and neat. Even if you're only eating a little bit, you're not eating a lot, but the table should be presentable. You're not allowed to hold, and this is again etiquette of a meal. You're not allowed to hold something. People do it, but there's a halachos. You're not supposed to hold something bigger than 2 ounces and bite into it. So that in a practical sense, let's say you're having a sandwich. Okay, so we learned before, let's say for argument's sake, a slice of rye bread is 1 ounce. So if you have a sandwich, you're having 2 ounces. If you're having, let's say, a cheese sandwich, deli sandwich, not together. You're having a deli sandwich, cheese sandwich, tuna sandwich, whatever it is. Okay, so now so what's the proper thing? You hold it in 10 fingers, you make a bracha. But this sandwich is really bigger than a kibetza, which is 2 ounces. So halacha says, and some people want to say, let me finish the statement. Halacha says you shouldn't bite into that sandwich. Why? It's not refined. It's not able. It's not proper. It looks like you're a fresser. Okay? Some people want to say nowadays it became accepted that you have a sandwich and you bite into the sandwich. But ideally, the truth is, if somebody really wants to follow halacha properly, they have a sandwich, they should cut it in half, that you don't have bigger than a kibetza. You have the 2 slices are cut in half. And then you should also, you shouldn't hold the food in one hand and pull it up. And in other words, this is not Kabbalah. The halacha is saying when you eat, you have to eat like a mensch. The previous Rebbe, when the Chassidim were in France after the war, on the way out from Russia, the Chassidim were going on the way to America, or so wherever they were going. So a bunch of them stopped in France, some stopped in Austria, in different places. But the Frierdiker Rebbe gave out a notice to the people in France that they should teach the children to eat properly, with proper etiquette. That they should teach the children. It was very important. The Frierdiker Rebbe said that the children should eat properly. And it's a very important thing. If you notice, kids should be taught how to sit by the table properly and eat like a mensch and so on and so forth. Also, if you have a cup of liquid, you shouldn't drink it down in one shot. I'm not talking about kiddush or 4 cups of wine. That is halacha. You have to drink it in one time. But if you have a big cup, you're not like a 16-ounce cup to drink down the whole thing at one shot. It doesn't look nice. It looks like you didn't drink for 10 years. So all these things, it's just very simple. If you drink it, it says if you drink it one time, you're a gargaron. Gargaron is the drinking language for a fresser, a guzzler. You can use a guzzler. If you drink it 2 times, it's proper. 3 times is haughty, but again, it depends. If it's a cup of tea and it's a hot, you're not going to drink it in 2-3 times. So everything basically, if it's a small cup, you could drink it at one time. Bottom line is what Allah is saying, when you eat, you have to eat like a mensch. Another interesting din, you're not allowed to bite into a piece of bread and put it down on the table. Because by some people, it's gross that you bit into it and then you put it down on the table. So it says, halacha, you should break off a piece, eat it, but you don't put the piece of bread that you bit into, or the same thing, by the way, would apply to an apple. You bite into an apple, you just don't put it on the table in front of people. It doesn't look nice. You should give it to your friend or into a plate because it might be gross. You shouldn't drink from a cup and give it to your friend because he might be repelled by it. Or he might drink against his will and doesn't want to drink. In other words, very simple. eat like a mensch, drink like a mensch, be a mensch. That's bottom line. A person, especially when they have guests, halacha says they shouldn't be like a stingy person by the meal, because then if the people will feel that you're like, it bothers you that they're eating the food because it costs money, then they'll be embarrassed to eat. You should make sure make sure they're comfortable eating at your table, that they're not feeling that they feel that you're going to charge them for the food they ate. Another din, which is very important, and the Gemara has a whole thing about this, you're not allowed to talk during a meal. That means while you're in the middle of eating. Between courses, there's no problem. You're not allowed to talk, even Torah, while you're eating. While you're eating the actual piece of food and you're chewing it, you shouldn't talk. Why? It's dangerous. Because normally you have the food pipe and the windpipe. So normally the food goes down the food pipe. But if you're talking, then the windpipe is open, and the food can, God forbid, go down the wrong pipe, and you can choke. It could be a sakana. To the extent, it says in halacha, that if, let's say, you're in the middle of chewing something and somebody sneezes, you shouldn't say gesundheit or gesund or labriut or whatever, because you're not allowed to talk. Even Torah, you're not allowed to talk. If somebody asks you a question in learning, let's say, and you have food in your mouth, you have to motion, you have to wait until you finish eating, and then you're able to talk. Okay. After the meal, our custom is to do mayim achreinim. If it's the weekday, we say al naris bavel. If it's Shabbos, we do shira malis. Another thing is like this: you're not allowed to make bread, do things with bread that are despicable. There was a whole issue with this many years ago. The caterers stopped it. I hope most places they stopped it. You remember a number of years ago, caterers, instead of serving soup in a bowl, they would take a round piece of bread. It was a roll cut in half, and the bottom piece would be round. So it was like a bowl, and they used to put the soup into the bread, and the people would eat that with the bread instead of the bowl. Rabbanim were very, very upset with that for two reasons. Number one, most people didn't eat the bread. So you're mamish baltashchis, you're transgressing the sin, a biblical sin of wasting food. And secondly, a lot of times the bread would become disgusting afterwards. It was just like hot soup. It would make the bread disgusting. So therefore, Rabbanim were very much against it. In many of the cities, generally speaking, they stopped it. I can't say they stopped it everywhere, but they stopped it in many places. Somebody asked a question. 1 second. Need to cover the challah and other. They need to cover challah and other flour powder while blessing the wine. Halacha a minute. If you're only on Shabbos, it's halacha. You have to cover the challah. When you say the bracha on challah on Shabbos, you're required to cover the two challahs while saying the blessing. That's not for now, but some do, some don't, and we're going to leave it at that. Some people do, some people don't. Okay, let's continue here. You're not allowed to throw bread, like we said, even when it's not getting disgusting from it. But if food like nuts or things like that, or if you have a bag of food, you can throw it as long as the food won't be got disgusting. You should be careful not to take crumbs and throw it in a place where people step. In other words, halacha says like this: you shouldn't take crumbs of bread and throw them in a place where on the floor where people are going to step. You can only throw it into the garbage if you want, into water, but you shouldn't, because kasher la'anias, the Gemara says, if you take crumbs and you throw them on the floor where people step, it makes you poor. I mean, it's a spiritual thing. Kosher lanias means it actually makes you poor. So the Shulchan says you shouldn't do it. Again, there's a number of dinim here that people usually don't keep. For instance, it says if you're drinking water, you shouldn't drink it in front of people. You should turn your head to the side. But that's only water, none other drinks. Again, that's usually not kept today anyway. Another interesting halacha of etiquette of a meal is you shouldn't stare at a person eating. You shouldn't stare at the person or at his clothing that he might have spilled things on. Why? Because it's an embarrassment. The person will become embarrassed, watching somebody eat. I never understood, you'll excuse if people disagree with me, I never understood how people can eat in these outdoor cafes with hundreds of people walking by and you're eating there and everybody's watching you eat. They just don't know how they do it. I would feel very uncomfortable doing it, but people do it. But halacha is, if somebody is eating, you're not allowed to stare at them or at their clothing when they're eating because it can cause embarrassment. Next is, this thing we discussed a little bit before. It says you shouldn't give food to a person to eat unless if you know he's going to make a bracha and wash for bread. So that's a whole issue by itself. Are you allowed to do it? Are you not allowed to do it? In Kitzur Shchunoch, it says you shouldn't give somebody that comes to your house bread unless if you know they're going to make a bracha and they're going to wash their bread. I did a podcast, and one of the questions about when one spouse is not as religious as the next, or you have non-religious people coming to your house. One of the questions I was asked was, somebody comes to your house, you give him a can of Coke to drink, and he might not make a bracha. Or he's not religious, he's not going to make a bracha. Are you allowed to give him the Coke? So what I answered him was, I understand the big deal. The guy coming to your house, you give him a can of Coke, tell him to make a bracha. Why shouldn't he? The guy says, yeah, we can learn so much from you Chabadniks. I mean, it's a simple logic. The guy comes to your house, you give him food, you ask him to make a bracha. He has to be a mean person not to make a bracha, unless he's doing it to spite. But why shouldn't you offer a person food? Why shouldn't you make a bracha? But then he told me, he said that the host said that there's a lot of Rabbanim that hold, even though he's not going to make a bracha, you can give him, because the damage you're doing to that person is worse than the damage of not making a bracha, whatever it may be. Now, if you have guests at the table and they're sitting guests are sitting at a host's table, it says in Shchunoch, they should not take from the food and give it to the children of the host. Why not? Because maybe the host doesn't have enough food for everybody, and he told the kids not to eat if there should be enough food for the guests, and now you're giving them the food, they're going to be in a very interesting predicament. And you're going to embarrass them that there's not enough food. But it says in halacha, if there's a lot of food on the table, you see there's ample for everybody, then there's no problem. You can take the and give it to the kids. Okay, another din is, I'm going to skip that for now and do it next time because we need more time for it. Okay, what happens if somebody is in the middle of a meal and they want to go, they have realized they have to daven mincha. And they go in the middle of the meal to daven mincha. You don't have to make hametzi again. Or even if somebody slept, in Yiddish there's expression, chapta dremel. He took a short nap. You don't have to make a bracha, but sometimes you're going to have to rewash your bread without a bracha because your hands might have touched things unless you were careful with your hands not to actually touch anything else. Okay, we're going to leave this here now in halacha. We're going to go to Tanya.